Hello, and welcome back to the Faith and Ecology podcast, an initiative of the Jesuits for Climate Justice, Faith in Action at COP30 campaign. I am your host, Daniela, and as we approach the final episode of this first season, we invite you to reflect on how faith and spirituality can truly shape our response to the climate crisis. Around the world, faith communities represent nearly a quarter of the global population and are filled with powerful voices that constantly advocate for environmental and social justice. In today's episode, we'll explore alongside our guests how spiritual practices help bridge ecological and social justice challenges, guiding us toward a more hopeful, holistic, and connected vision for the future. Join us as we journey towards COP30 in 2 short weeks, united in the care for our common home and one another. Our first guest today is Filipe Martins. He is a Portuguese Jesuit priest whose journey blends technical expertise with deep spiritual commitment. Born in 1970, he began his path with a degree in electronics engineering, followed by a year of volunteer work in Mozambique. After joining the Jesuits, Filipe pursued studies in philosophy and theology across Braga, Madrid, and Rome. Since his ordination, he has dedicated himself to diverse missions, including university pastoral work, support for immigrants, homeless reintegration, school management, and assistance to the Portuguese Jesuit Provincial. In 2022, he became the director for the Jesuit European Social Center, also known as JESC. Thank you so much for coming on the Faith and Ecology podcast. Could you tell us a little bit more about how Ignatian spirituality guides us in finding God in all aspects of creation?
Well, thank you for having me, Daniela. When you try to understand the loving look of God towards creation, remember when you go back to Genesis and he saw everything was good. And I think Ignatius, when he challenges us or invites us to get the proper attitude towards the world, towards creation, towards the other, I think this would be a first bullet point, if I can keep on using this image, which is the love for creation, a loving gaze towards everything and everybody. But then there's a second one. It's a known sentence with the church, this preferential option for the poor. And I think the Ignatian spirituality also calls us to take the same approach. Ignatius was very careful or attentive also to help in taking decisions with the ones who have the power to change structures, but also to say, never forget. An integral ecology, it's not a personal relation with the world, but with the others around me. So to take care of the others, to leave no one behind. A third one, and I think it's very much connected, you have to look at things in a rushing culture, a consumption logic of experiences of social media, this slowdown, this to go more in depth, to be in contact with your depth, where also Jesus is present, God is present. This is also integral ecology. So the relationship with oneself. When we speak about integral ecology, there's also this dimension of being in touch with others at a deeper level, in touch with nature at a deeper level. And this, I would say, it's also something that connects Ignatian spirituality and integral ecology. Someone once defined that Ignatian spirituality as an open eye spirituality, which means engagement with the world. So to change it, we spoke about changing the structure. So it's not just I do my retreat, I take care of my own salvation. You save yourself through saving the others, contributing to a better world, open and engaged with the others. Ecology or the care for creation, it's not just now I care more about separating trash or I spend my weekends more in nature, but it's a new way of looking at the world, of restructuring economic models. Ignatius was also careful. So it's to be pious in a good sense, their spirituality, their prayer, but also so to use our hearts, to use our hands when we change, but also to use our minds when we rethink and propose new models of life. that Ignatian spirituality can help us to think and rethink. And a lot of people are already doing that. So it's also a point of encounter with other, even non-religious people, these beyond GDP processes. How can we think that a well-being economy is how we can rethink our worlds? It's also, I think this would be a good contribution of Ignatian spirituality towards integral ecology.
Within the context of your work at JESC, especially using practices such as contemplation and action, how can you describe Ignatian spirituality as guiding us?
Well, and thanks for referring to the experience of JESC these last months or even these last years, this ecosystem here in Brussels. So it's not only Belgium, it's the European Union, how it works. So it affects 27 different countries. Many of the decisions are taken together between Brussels and the national capitals. The European Parliament is also here at stake. And also, as you are aware, when we speak about Europe, it's not that we live apart from the other continents. Many of these decisions also affect other countries. How does the Ignatian spirituality help us in this? I would say three words. One is to look for wisdom. We are in times of uncertainty, and often with political decisions, how to address this topic, how to engage with this person. Maybe before it was easier to have the answers. And I think sometimes with this discernment, this word that the Jesuits use a lot, we have to wait, you have to stop. Sometimes you have maybe something kind of enraged you. We sometimes often this with the team, and you have to stop and try to discern how can we bring people on board. That's one thing. The second thing that I mentioned in the first question, it brings you depth or invites you to depth. And hope is, as a known politician, Philippe Lambert's, I allow myself to quote him, he says, I am not allowed to give up. I am not allowed to give up hope. So faith tells me there's always a way to move forward. There's always a way to incorporate others. We keep on talking about this, how we're not allowed to give up, even if it looks like a difficult path. So I would say when you ask me about these characteristics, how Ignatian spirituality helped me to look at worlds at the different dimensions with an attitude of hope, of wanting to roll up our sleeves and to put ourselves into the work, like in this campaign, in this writing the letters, reading, trying to be informed. I think we are definitely called to engage in creating and building a better world.
Thank you, Filipe. And indeed, using discernment at the intersection of any faith and spiritual practice is what can help guide us towards a more holistic approach to climate justice. Here to talk a little bit more about the communal aspect of this discernment is Sister Sheila Kinsey. She is a member of the Franciscan Sisters, Daughters of the Sacred Hearts of Jesus and Mary congregation, and currently coordinates the Integrity for Nonviolence program. She has previously served as Executive Co-Secretary for the Justice, Peace, and Integrity of Creation Commission under the Union of Superior Generals and the International Union of Superior Generals in Rome. Sister Sheila is deeply engaged in issues such as poverty, human rights, forced migration, anti-trafficking, peace building, and environmental care. She led the UISG campaign Sowing Hope for the Planet, promoting the integration of the Laudato Si encyclical principles in religious congregations through education and networking. Her extensive background includes educational leadership, directing shelters for women who have suffered abuse, and developing programs focused on faith, compassion, and nonviolence. Thank you for joining us, Sister Sheila. In your opinion and extensive experience, what role does faith play in mobilizing communities and resources for climate justice?
Well, I am really excited about having the opportunity to share with you. So, in this regard, I'd like to really look at the Loss and Damage Fund. This time, let me just look at what religious women are doing. Because women focus on building relationships in their commitment to a unifying vision for action. And I like to bring in my model called Integrity for Nonviolence as it's operative in my work of JPIC. This model focuses on 4 values: creating respect, practicing honesty, promoting justice, and nurturing wholesome relationship. It entails developing a successful plan that contains the conditions to achieve expectations. The plan develops a sense of belonging and embraces a collaborative spirit. The interactive work of the participants strengthens the vitality and the viability of the proposed action, and the general well-being necessitates opportunities for assessment to balance what is happening with the global concerns. And I'd like to share my experience and those of religious in a global involvement, but that was facilitated by our Catholic Kinsey and AEFJN. So they led us in a wonderful preparation to COP28 in Dubai. So that was then COP experience really being unfolded with our group. So the goal was to achieve a setup for the activation of the loss and damage funds. Since he focused on advocacy and listening to the voice of the vulnerable. And AFJN shared their cultural collaborations and their resilience. So they brought together two aspects so necessary to really help us understand and have a process to move forward. They gave us education. That was very important. What was happening, those who were suffering, and what was the impact. So we were all on the same page. So there is the leadership that's involved in COP that are invited then to the Vatican Secretary of State's office for sharing of our work, determining what we can collaborate on. We will learn what would be taking place with the Secretary of State, who would be representing their position, and so that we could know how to work together. So then we and those who we would call the civil society would have side events. We would talk about the problems, we suggest solutions, we would share our information. It was a strong networking process to find ways to support one another. So you can see with this COP30, which is going to build on a lot of achievements, we have to continue developing these trustworthy relationships. You can see we as a Catholic faith community, we're working together. We have to keep going forward.
When it comes to your faith as a religious sister and as a Franciscan, how does this support your effort? And how does your spiritual practice help you in sustaining these processes together with others?
Well, my Franciscan spirituality certainly influences the integrity for nonviolence. And it's about this contemplative space, which is in the integrity where we are alone with our God, that we determine what our ethical practices are, what our values, what our behaviors that demonstrate this. And then that's the nonviolent stance. That's that openness. That's the desire to do what it is that God wants us to do. That folds out into principles, common good, solidarity, subsidiarity, universal destination of goods, social justice, and then come through with specific social action. How do you plan? Have a vision. Know what you're about. Uniting, integrity, uniting the values of the heart for action. Then have the resources necessary, personal and physical and financial, and get going with it. Deal with the rationalizations for and against it. And when it gets to really be something that's tragic, then break that case. Find out what could be done. Look at where this can be sustainable, that this loss and damage fund is where it needs to be. And we are trustworthy people. We commit and we really give what we need to have for that fund and to move forward. So the energy is there, and it comes from a definite prayer life, a commitment for the work of God in whatever is presented to me, want to do it the best I can and encourage others to do the same, because we will be guided on the way. We just have to take the time to listen and have the courage to act and to do it together. Jesus created a community, and that's how we learn.
Thank you, Sister Sheila. Spirituality has the power to strengthen collaboration towards climate justice. And I believe that one of these strengths is to collaborate across faiths and spiritualities. And in order to illustrate that a little bit more, I've asked a relative to come on the podcast. I want to introduce you to our final guest, Keshia DeFreece Lawrence, who is a Ramapough Lenape tribal member and doctoral candidate in Indigenous Studies at Trent University in Ontario, Canada. As an Indigenous traditional ecological knowledge practitioner and community advocate, Keshia has over 5 years of experience advancing Indigenous and environmental sovereignty. They have been a 4-time UN Youth Keynote Speaker and helped bring Indigenous youth voices to the Pact for the Future. With a master's in international law and conflict negotiations from the University for Peace, Keshia focuses on cultural sustainability and environmental peace building. Recently, they served as an inaugural tribal fellow at John Carter Brown University and Indigenous education specialist at Harvard Forest. Thank you so much for joining us, Ep8.
Thank you so much, Anashik. Our spirituality is based not only around our ecologies that we sit in, so whatever ecosystem we're surrounded by, but also they're so deeply then attached to what our worldview and what our perspectives are. And considering the lack of separation between human and non human kin, the balance that we seek is so easily replicated and exemplified in our practices and our traditions. I think sometimes food is the best example of what that spiritual and ecological reciprocity and kinship really looks like, how food is prayed over and prepared, how some communities might leave out what's known as a spirit plate. So that way it can support not only non human relations, but humans who might have passed over. And that's not something you have to be Indigenous to see. But what you're seeing past that, or what the Indigenous lens is pulling out, is the spirituality of persona and of story, regardless of what the narrative applied is, regardless of if that species speaks and sounds the same as us. We're identifying that it also has a story, and that story is sacred. We need to understand that all communities are different, but when we bring those community practices together, it offers a moment for individuals to thrive in their ecosystems of human ethos, meaning community members, family, but then everything else that gets brought into that space. Our ancestral traditions and practices allow us to find moments of nuanced reciprocity with each other. And as somebody who goes back and forth between Indigenous spaces and what is considered Western science, when I bring in a traditional practice, it is the role of our ancestral teachings to not only inform what's happening today, but to push past compliments and be a part of what is meaningful transitions for not only how we do science, how we think about climate, but how we think about spirituality and that overlap of all of those worlds. And I think it's important to address the role of storytelling and creation stories regardless of which community. Indigenous peoples carry stories that are lived experiences. They're not just stories. There really are procedures and protocols and data that is just being passed down in the most loving of ways. Practices that we see that. We can see youth grow up in ceremonial backgrounds or in rural backgrounds constantly on the land. And the role of history in our environmental relationships has become even more critical because 9 times out of 10, the spirituality that we carry today is not fully different than that of our ancestors, but we understand now that the land might not ever look like what it once did. Where the generations of coming to terms with the ocean will never look the way it once did. I think now more than ever for Indigenous youth, we deal with a grief that my Haudenosaunee relatives tell me is good. We learn that we can love based on how much grief we have, based on how much we mourn, becoming more and more connected, quite frankly. I think we're at that point where we're realizing we need our spirituality to remember ecological processes. When we think about territories and Indigenous Caribbean spaces that have lost mangroves, not because they as people have lost them, but because there's a human on human component that has contributed to that loss. And it's through that type of grief where we've lost moments of spiritual connection still to that place, Skywalk. And I think for Indigenous peoples, when we also explain our environments in the same way, we're able to really have interconnected conversations because now we're understanding that spirituality is not only a part of everything we do, but it is literally a knowledge basket at the same time. And you can't ever turn off your knowledge basket. We keep those thoughts and we keep that energy with us. So being able to really understand, appreciate, but also apply that kind of energy regardless of cultural and ethnic background. Our rallying call is to understand that our spirituality and our stories are attached to our ancestors, and we're that conduit to keep moving that energy and to keep that fire going. So if you want to include us then that means including the many of us. Because nowhere in my spiritual background, nowhere in my creation stories has anything been done by one entity. It has all been multiple and in connection to each other. So to invite Indigenous peoples to have panels designated to Indigenous peoples is critical, but it needs to be multiple and they need to represent what we call Mother Earth. And I think a part of that need is also solidifying our role in history, having peer reviews, outside sources, those are critical things, whether it be from academia to professionalism. But when it comes to Indigenous cultural sustainability, governmental participation, all of a sudden we get siloed to just when we're invited. And that's not enough. COP30 for climate change is also in 2026, the COP for migratory species. There's a few other meetings happening in between. At some point, it takes an Indigenous person to ask, why are these interconnected? It is all of the places that we have stories for that we need to be included in. Yes, a Navajo needs to be involved in the deep sea ocean treaty. Yes, the same thing is true of our Caribbean and Arawak relatives. I think one thing that the international realm doesn't fully understand when it comes to some of these conferences is how much are you actually contributing and supporting intercultural Indigenous communications? And then how much are you also supporting where we create solutions, actually applying that? We must respectfully move past that while still keeping that with us. But it's not enough to just have us come and be keynote speakers and move on. We are people that care about relationality and the continued relationality. Right? And so for COP30 and moving forward, any of the convening of the parties, I think more countries and delegates and leaders need to come prepared. If you want to engage with Indigenous peoples or any Indigenous community or the Indigenous communities of your territory, then you also need to prepare for the next 8 to 10 years of relations at the same time. And for me, that is beyond free, prior, informed consent. That is now also participation, but this is now consent of relationality.
As we close this episode, let us reflect on the powerful insights shared by each of our guests. Filipe reminded us of the deep connections between Ignatian spirituality and integral ecology, calling us to care for both creation and the most vulnerable with hope and discernment. Sister Sheila highlighted the strength of her Franciscan spirituality in inspiring collaborative climate action, prayer, and ethical commitment. Keshia brought forward Indigenous spiritual traditions as vital guides for holistic stewardship, urging each of us to amplify Indigenous voices and foster ongoing relationships between communities in order to nurture and shape the future. These rich perspectives deepen our understanding of faith's transformative role in climate justice. And so I leave you with this quote from the Islamic Declaration on Global Climate Change. Excessive pollution from fossil fuels threatens to destroy the gifts bestowed on us by God. Gifts such as functioning climate, healthy air to breathe, regular seasons, and living oceans. But our attitude to these gifts has been short-sighted, and we have abused them. What will future generations say of us, who leave them a degraded planet as our legacy? So join me next time for the final episode of the first season of the Faith and Ecology podcast, where we will bring these threads together and explore how faith communities worldwide are preparing to take a bold and united stance at COP30.